We will go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Tristana Perkle. I'm the ED of the School Garden Support Organization Network of the SGSO Network. And you are here at the School Food Forest Design webinar, where we will be diving into all aspects of design for a food forest located at a school. We've got a great lineup of speakers here for you today: Debbie LaBelle and Eddie Racinos from the Miami Education Fund, Lainey Klein-King and Jorge Espinoza of Growing Healthy Kids in Northern California. And we also, if you go to the next slide, are co-hosting this webinar today with the National Farm to School Network, and I'll pass it off to Tomas to introduce himself and the National Farm to School Network.
Thanks, Tristana. Hello, everyone. My name is Tomas Delgado, Program Manager with the National Farm to School Network and based in Urbana, Illinois, Central Illinois. The National Farm to School Network serves as a resource hub for school communities and local growers in efforts of promoting nourishing, sustainable, and local and culturally relevant foods for kiddos in both ECE and K-12 settings. NFSN, in collaboration with our partners at School Garden Support Organization, are thrilled to introduce these opportunities to host more inspiring conversations within our respective networks on the topics and the intersections of agroforestry and school gardens. We hope that this is one of many intentional conversations that we can have on this intersection, in addition to the start of a growing collaboration and building more agroforestry resources for school communities around the country. And while these conversations and discussions are not new, they're particularly timely in occurring at a moment where educators around the country and communities are seeking more creative and tactful ways to address growing concerns around challenging topics that youth are interested in, touching on food security, food accessibility, community trauma, and the ongoing impacts of climate change. So fortunately, we have tools and practices like agroforestry that can serve as solutions for many of these challenges. And agroforestry being one of those applications, food forest particularly will be relevant to today's conversation among many other nature-based solutions that communities can adopt to alleviate many of the stressors around food inaccessibility and the climate crisis. Organizations such as the Savannah Institute or the Center for Agroforestry at University of Missouri have diligently promoted the multifaceted benefits of agroforestry and its various practices, with food forest being one of them. And food forest, agroforestry, or sustainable or regenerative agricultural practices are integral in the indigenous cultures around the world, especially here in present-day United States. For Native communities, the concept of food forest aligns deeply with their tradition of sustainable approaches to agriculture and land stewardship. And thanks to the traditional ecological knowledge of indigenous foodways, we're able to really enjoy many of the native foods found in food forest within present-day Florida, Illinois, and California, which you'll hear more about today. If today's content inspires you to practice food forests in your communities, I encourage you to look into these projects and approach them with a sense of celebration, humility, and respect for the ecological and agricultural ingenuity of indigenous communities around the country. So without further ado, I'll hand it back to Tristana to introduce our panelists. But thank you so much for allowing us to have this conversation with you all. And yeah, looking forward to it.
Thank you, Tomas, and thank you for being a thought partner in this project and in this overarching topic. Thanks for sharing so eloquently, setting the stage for us. So we'll dive into some housekeeping pieces here. This webinar is recorded, so if someone you think would be interested, you'll be able to find a copy of the recording in the recording library or on our website. I'll also be, in just a couple of minutes here, putting a resource handout into the chat. This will have all of the relevant links from our speakers today, as well as a copy of our presentation slides. So I'll put a link to the resource handout in the chat in just a moment. This webinar is an hour and 15 minutes, so we'll do Q&A in the last 15 minutes. As questions come up, I encourage you to put them into the Q&A section in your Zoom. You'll see the little panel and the little Q&A box. Just go ahead and put your questions in there, and at the end, we'll be organizing them, summarizing them for our panelists to answer. And then finally, please share your feedback about this webinar. It's incredibly helpful for us to continue to bring you webinars that are relevant to you in the format and ways in which you find helpful and interesting. So would love your feedback at the end of this webinar. So if you go to the next slide, just want to make sure that you all know about the Growing School Garden Summit. Just a quick announcement, we will be gathering for the second Growing School Garden Summit, just a wonderful gathering for all school garden professionals at any size or any region. We'll be gathering in San Diego from March 15th through the 18th. The SGSO Network is one of 3 main partners supporting the Sprouts Healthy Communities Foundation in this event, along with Life Lab. So if you're interested, please join us in San Diego. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to our first set of speakers. We have 2 different organizations sharing with you today, so I'm passing it off to the first group, the Miami Education Fund. Please take it away.
Thank you, Tristana, for the intro, and Tomas also. And we're extremely excited to be here today. It's amazing to hear that this is one of the large webinars that so many people are interested in learning about food forests. Just to provide some context, my name is Eddie Racinos. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Food Forest for Schools program for the Education Fund. And I'm here with my partner in crime, Debbie LaBelle. She's the other program manager. They call us the twins. So we've been at this now for just over 10 years, installing food forests. The very first food forest in a public elementary school in the nation was done with funding from the Education Fund. That was back then when I was in the classroom as an art teacher. So my background is in education, and don't let anybody tell you that planting a food forest can't turn into a big deal, because now this whole program is based on food forests here in Miami-Dade County. So Debbie, if you want to move on and let us know a little bit about the size of the program.
Hi, yeah, so our program is in Miami-Dade County. We are currently the 3rd largest school district in the country. We have over 500 public elementary schools. We service gardens and food forests at 71 schools, and 30 of those 71 are now food forests. Some of them are still edible gardens that we are in the process of transitioning into the food forest model little by little. And then we have over 20,000 students that learn in our food forest every school year. Miami-Dade County is a very, very large landmass area also. And then Eddie?
Yep. So yeah, there is a lot of programming with the students that goes along with the food forest. It's not just a physical food forest, but obviously, there's people involved, teachers, administrators, students. But this webinar is to focus more on the design of a food forest. One of the things over the years that we've worked a lot on is actually defining what is a food forest. We've noticed that sometimes people were installing raised bed gardens and labeling them as food forests, and there wasn't a lot of clarity on that. So it's really important to start from there. What actually is a food forest? How do we define it? And over the years, how have we built up and onto that definition? So just to see if the audience out there, if you have any ideas. I know that for a lot of you, food forests are a new thing, but when you think of the difference between a raised bed garden and a food forest, what are some words that come to mind? How would you define a food forest in your own words? If you could just go ahead and type that into the chat. And yeah, I'm seeing somebody wrote already year round. I'm seeing permaculture, big, yep. So natural, takes care of itself, perennial species. These are all fantastic, biodiverse. So we're definitely getting a lot of regenerative. That's a great word. So absolutely all of those things. And somebody just put in multi-story natives. Absolutely, all of those pertain to this. And you know, we wanted a way that it would be a lot more clear, so that when people are approaching this from a practitioner standpoint and from actually a designer standpoint, that they would have a little bit more of a roadmap of how to get there to actually have a completed food forest. So what we've done is we have, you know, the principles of a food forest, of what makes a food forest, and we also have the elements of design. So Debbie, if you want to go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, just to show, you know, first of all, the spaces that we're starting off with when we're going to the schools. We do, so somebody had put in the comments that food forests are large. Yes, you definitely need a space. It does not always have to be large though, because obviously we work with the spaces that we have. We're lucky enough in South Florida that every school does have an outdoor space. And the vision for these food forests is that every student should have a safe, beautiful outdoor learning space. So that would definitely be step one, you know, is starting with a space. And then we completely transform those spaces. This is what that same exact space with a completed food forest. So that's kind of the first thing, is that, yeah, a food forest is not like a raised bed garden in that it's a thing that you walk up to. It's actually an immersive space. And, you know, when you're designing an immersive space, you have to come up with ways to divide up those different areas and those different spaces so that they're actually functional. And especially since this is in a school, it has to be functional for education. Okay, so as far as the principles of what makes it a food forest as opposed to a raised bed garden, I saw a lot of these mentioned in the comments already. Somebody had put in perennials. Absolutely, it's based on edible perennials. So for those of you that are not sure what perennials are, that's just a plant that has a longer than a 1-year life cycle. So we try to plant things that are going to be continuing to grow year after year after year. So you're not really starting from scratch, right? Like you would in a raised bed garden, where you would have to till the soil, rotate crops, you know, because you're working with annuals and working more with the seasons. It builds habitat. So that's another one of the principles. When you're designing, you're keeping in mind also that, yeah, when you plant a tree, you're creating habitat for birds. When you're building soil, you're creating habitat for, you know, all the beneficial insects that are going to be living in the soil. When you're planting things that are going to bloom, you're building habitat for pollinators. So that's also really important. And that leads right into biodiversity. That goes hand in hand with biodiversity. So we never try to do any monocropping. You know, if in a lot of raised bed gardens, you'll see like an entire raised bed where it's like just collard greens, and on the next raised bed, it will be just lettuce and, you know, and so on and so on. We have what we call planting islands. And inside of those planting islands, we plant a numerous, you know, variety of plants in there, so that we're not attracting any one pest or any one disease, you know, to that area by doing that. So it's a lot of interplanting that goes on. And it's multi-layered also, which was the last thing. So it's multi-story. That was something that somebody also had put in the comments. Debbie, did I miss anything before we move on to this next part?
No, I think we covered everything.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, then we also have our elements of design. So aside from those 4 principles, you know, that are more about the ecology or ecological principles of a food forest, we always combine that with the elements of design. Here, before we move on, if somebody can think of, if you're going to design a food forest in a school, what are some of the things you might want to include in a food forest that's, you know, particularly for a school? Somebody said kids. Okay, you want to take kids into mind. You know, that's something you want to take into mind, absolutely, because, you know, safety hazards, etc. Accessibility to plants, walking paths. These are all things that are coming up in the chat. Walkways, water sources. Okay, excellent. So yeah, these are all things that you want to think about. Excellent. So things like you know, some of the things like that people mentioned in the chat, like the people, the kids, you know, water sources, those are things that would influence, you know, the way you place things on a design, but they necessarily wouldn't be the elements of your design. So that, but it does influence where those elements end up. You know, so obviously if there's a water source somewhere, you need a path leading to the water source, for example. And somebody had mentioned the people. We might as well go right into it, into the first element, which is entrances. So absolutely, when you're designing, you're keeping people in mind. It's a space that people are going to be walking through. You want to make it inviting, right? So it's, you don't want people walking around it. You want people walking through it, and having a big open entrance that funnels into the space, that will funnel people into the space. Like that example on the left there, that's one way that you can accomplish that. Sometimes people put gates for different safety reasons. So again, somebody had mentioned keeping kids in mind. If that's something that in that particular school they feel that they need, you know, a gate to only have it open for certain times. But again, it's a marked entrance. You know that that's a space that you're supposed to enter. So just, you know, by defining an entrance and you know, which also, you know, doubles as exits for your food forest, it can be multiple, but you want to have those defined, not just you know, kind of leave it open for people to decide how they approach the space. Okay. And that goes right into our pathways. So when we do our pathways, one of the best things to do is, when you're designing, is to actually observe how people already walk through the space. I'll give an example. When we were installing our very first food forest, there was a path that, you know, would lead directly across it, because students were always crossing over the grass in that path, even though they weren't supposed to. They naturally wanted to, because it was a shortcut to the music room, the art room, the media center. So people naturally wanted, you know, had created these paths through the grass in that courtyard. So, you know, why, you know, go against the grain, right? If people already are naturally using these as paths, you might as well build those into your design. And absolutely, having defined pathways helps to provide structure. So when you're you know, creating an outdoor space for a school, we all know that for students, we absolutely need structure. For doing tours of the space, you need that structure. And something a lot of people don't take into mind when they're doing pathways is the width, right? Because if it's for a public school, you're gonna have to do a wider path than you would normally do, like if you were doing rows on a farm, because you want people to easily, you know, have maybe 2 ways of traffic going through these pathways, and sometimes even get them wider than that, right? So when you're adding pathways to a space, it's defining how people walk through it, but also what they experience in the space. So if it's a narrow path, and then it opens up into a wider space, then it's going to make that space feel even bigger, right? Because they just came from a narrow path into an open space. So the combination of narrow and wide is very important for that. Deb, you want to add to the what they're seeing there on that picture on the right?
Yeah, I'd like to add that, you know, sometimes with lessons and square foot gardening, a lot of times the lesson is focused on the garden box, but we've also had students utilize the pathways for different ways. We have lots of chalk that we give out, and you can see in the right, the kids are doing math on the pathways. And just yesterday I saw a class, they were figuring out square footage of an area with the blocks because they were all a uniform size. So the pathways have multiple uses, and sometimes you just need to look outside the box a little on the lessons.
Yep. And just quick bonus about that, for the sake of permaculture, they do double as French drains. So those gravel paths that we install, like the one on the left, they're great. We get so much water here in South Florida and in the subtropics. It sometimes rains for days on end. It's actually helped us to avoid flooding in the schools to create these paths. We dig, deep trenches, fill them with gravel, and that's great for collecting the water and sourcing it back into the roots of the planting.
And it's also reduced our having to water plants in our drier season because it retains a lot more water.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. And then for your outdoor classroom, so there's a couple different pictures you're seeing here, because it's important to not think of an outdoor classroom as just maybe one space. You may want to break it up into several spaces. So there might be some areas that are for seating areas, and some other more open spaces where you can actually do demonstrations. So we have both. We install demonstration areas where you can have an entire class form a circle, and that's actually the way that we begin and end every single lesson outdoors with the students. So having that big wide open space, that's not something you would normally do because people are sometimes thinking about productivity and how much can I grow and how can I maximize the production of my land. But obviously this is a school food forest, and it's involves a lot more the education aspect and being able to hold discussions and have that circle where you can demonstrate something in the center and everybody can participate. So circular areas, very important. We love to use circular areas for our outdoor classroom spaces. And then you can see that sometimes we also add pavers and tables, seating areas where you can put materials, observation areas, things for students to use different tools outdoors. So they can have on those tables magnifying glasses, they can write in their journals. So it's different activities. So it's very important to think about the activities that you're going to be doing now that you're managing a classroom outdoors. And Debbie, did you want to add anything to the outdoor classroom?
No, just the outdoor classrooms help with administrators. I know a lot of us have had administrators when the students are out there kind of see it negatively as maybe when the students are in the garden that they're playing, that they're not learning. By having these classroom center types areas, we've found it's relaxed the administration's criticism of the garden areas because they see the students using it as a center the same as they would inside of a classroom.
Yep, that's a great point. Absolutely. Okay, and then the banana circles, this we see as the cornerstone, almost symbolic of our food forest. It's like a microcosm of our food forest. And the reason I'm saying that is because it is multi-layered in itself. It's one of the planting islands that we have. In the center is for those of you, if you're not familiar with the system of a banana circle, the center contains a pit, and that pit is dug out. And inside that pit goes all the different clippings from the garden. Any thing that can be composted can go directly in there. And the beauty of this is that you don't have to turn it. You don't have to, later remove it from the pit and take it and spread it out. You can just leave your compost there where it is in the center and grow bananas year round. And Debbie's going to talk a little bit more about, we know not everybody can grow bananas. But
So,
yeah, and it is a closed energy system. So again, bringing permaculture ideas back into it. Any waste from the banana circle is actually not waste because it's composted right back into the system. So that closed energy loop is, symbolic of what we want food forests to do, which is to mimic a natural forest. And Debbie, go ahead and you were gonna add some
yeah,
other.
so
Yeah.
we're lucky enough to grow bananas in abundance here in South Florida. I know we have all different climates here on this webinar, so you can also call them compost circles and take the same idea behind it and use for any plant that you or tree that you might be growing in your climate that needs a lot of nutrients. So bananas are very greedy plants. They need tons of nutrients. So the compost circles work naturally for them and are fantastic to keep the fruit production growing year round for us. But for maybe a more northern climate, you could do a tomato circle or any other plant that needs lots of nutrients in order to grow. Tomatoes are amazing but they do need a lot of nutrients to grow. So you can just compost into the center. And as long as you make like a horseshoe shape planting area and leave that center area for the compost to be put in, mostly, the brown waste of clippings and whatever we're trimming around the food forest, it just gets composted in. And then students naturally will throw scraps from their lunch. But for the most part, it's just waste from the food forest that goes into the composting.
Yeah, and just a tip for anybody that might be interested, another crop that naturally does grow in a circle like this as a clump is clumping bamboo. And there's a ton of varieties of edible bamboos. You have to be careful with it because there's running bamboo that can be invasive. But that's another one that would be great for this type of system because bamboos also, require a lot of nutrients.
And we're going to take you on a really quick tour through one of our food forests because, like Eddie was saying, they are kind of an immersive experience. And it's hard to show from a picture what an actual food forest is. So this is our food forest at North Miami Elementary here in Miami.
You can just pay attention to how some of the pathways go from narrow to wider spaces, and there's seating areas in there.
Our classroom area.
Yep, the multi-stories in the planting areas. Sometimes the canopy, we keep the canopies lower. We don't have like 50-foot canopies because that adds another whole layer of maintenance. So these trees are around 25 feet.
And that's it. Yeah, we also want to keep some of the trees, like we have leaf crop trees in the myrtle families. We have allspice and bay rum. And we want the students to be able to harvest from the canopies and pick the leaves.
Okay.
Okay. And then we just want to really quickly, we have a very diverse community here in South Florida. So plants that we source for the food forest are very well known in the Caribbean and South and Central America. So we source plants from, and we have informationals that we send home with the students in Creole and in Spanish for the different spinaches and herbs and greens that we grow in the schools to help disseminate the information to the parents. And we harvest what's grown in the food forest and we send it out. We've given out over 250,000 bags of harvest from the school so far. And I love seeing by the end of the year, you have parents that become familiar with what's being sent home and then they start asking for what's growing at the school. So
yeah, and we are an international hub here. So these are tropical plants from all around the world. But it would definitely look a little bit different depending where you're from.
Yeah. So we do have like spinaches from Brazil, from Suriname. The longevity spinach that we grow is typical for in the Asian continent and and the Okinawa spinach obviously comes from Japan. So we love sprinkling in some geography lessons when the students are out in the food forest and they learn where all these plants different grow. And this is Eddie and I, and contact for information for us.
Yeah, and follow us on TikTok. Don't forget, we're both on TikTok. We have our Instagram up there. If you want to see a lot more of the food forest, we have interactions with students also, and a bunch of food forest tours that we posted. A lot of fun content. So yeah, it would be nice to see you there on social.
Awesome. And then we're gonna turn it over to our next presenters.
Hey y'all, I'm Jorge, tuning in from California, from Davis. Yeah, I wanted to, maybe it's a short webinar, but I wanted to ask everyone to take a deep breath together or two. Just take in all the amazing images and the beautiful experiences that we've just been presented. And if we can soften our gaze a little bit or look out a window, and just feel into, the ecosystems that we are in our own bodies. And if we can image a clearing, like after a fire or a landslide, or a tree that falls, and the sunlight suddenly hits the ground, and visualize the microbes in the soil starting to shift, towards more bacterially dominated, and the grasses come up with the sun's rays and the extra aeration. And then, a few months or a year after that, then the woodier, shrubby species start to come in, and then another layer of woody comes on top of that. And after years and years, there's, like the tree shoots shooting up, and we start to get these layers of coverage. And then we have a full canopy in the shade again, and then another old tree falls, and another clearing opens, or land stewards come in with fire to preserve part of that grassland for the grazing species, and to improve the production of acorns. Another little deep breath. And we hold that image of time. So we've seen this description of these beautiful school food forests that are coming up, that are being created by this amazing team. I'm so grateful to witness y'all's work, and I'm super inspired by it. And I want to bring it back to something that Eddie said. That the product here isn't just the fruits and the leaves and the roots, but the learning. And so, going from this, these many examples of school food forests to this project of a community food forest, I've been asked to define a community food forest, and it's something so undefinable. But one thing that I can say is, the product is so much more than the things that we're going to eat from this food forest, or this edible forest garden. And so there's, the capacity for stories to be had and to be tapped into at a community level. And I think that level of community engagement, and that desired interaction, and that desired reconnection, that desired immersion of the community, or the recognition that we are immersed in our ecosystem, I think is what might be a way to start to define a project as big as this. When our principal when I started to speak to her about what she wanted to see on this landscape, this acre of decommissioned field, I said to her, you know, Janice, the school is the food forest. You know, the school is the edible forest garden. In this most expansive understanding of succession that we went through in our little visualization, all plants and all, you know, forms are included in this going from bare landscape to forested, you know, from bacterial in the soil to dominated by fungi in the multi-layered shaded much more moist environment. And so yeah, I've been asked to define a community food forest, and I'm at a loss, but it begins at trying to understand what we want to do with our community here in this space. So I'll give it to Lainey to talk to a little bit of what the dream was and how it came about, and I'll join you all again in a second. Take it away, Lainey.
Thanks, Jorge. Next slide, Debbie. So my name's Lainey, and I am the program director for Growing Healthy Kids. We are a garden education program in Contra Costa County, that's Northern California. And we serve about 17 schools right now. So our primary program is science and nutrition programming during the school day. But in 2020, we received some funding to convert an existing garden space into what we would now consider a food forest, adding the components that Eddie spoke to really eloquently, the perennial superfoods and the biodiversity and multi-layered systems. So this picture on the right is a middle school in our district where we currently run field trip programs. And the easiest way to start a food forest is to start converting an existing garden space. As we did here, this was an existing garden that's been around for about 20 years. Several things were already planted there, but adding in the components that Eddie was speaking to can convert an existing garden into a food forest. So that's one way to do it. But Jorge and I really wanted to focus on our dream, which was starting a community food forest from scratch. Which we're doing down the street from Riverview, which you see in this picture here. And the way that we did that was through scrapping together several different funding sources and really building out a dream that we shared with the community, because it's going to take the entire community to build it out. So I'm just going to focus a little bit on some of those funding sources that helped us get started for any of you who are at that beginning point in wanting to start a food forest, as well as tackling some of the early challenges that might exist for you. So in spring of 2021, the pandemic was providing some opportunities that didn't exist before, one of which was Green Schoolyards of America, a fantastic institution. They were providing an emergency schoolyard design volunteer program. So landscape architects were coming and doing free outdoor site assessments and creating very formal designs that mapped out outdoor spaces, outdoor classrooms. And because we received one of these, we really had a blueprint for sharing our vision with the school district, school administrators, and community members to help create buy-in. And then in the summer, the literal seed money that got us started was a Whole Kids Foundation grant. It was $3,000, which is not a lot to get started on, but it was literally enough to enlist Jorge, who's an eco-social designer, to begin designing our food forest space and getting some extremely drought tolerant plants into the space before we had any irrigation in place. We are very dry, arid, and drought-prone climate up here, so water is extremely important. And in the fall of 2021, Cal Relief, which is funded through Cal Fire, provided us with a tree covery grant, which was for shade tree planting. And that enabled us to also receive 34 native California trees for our food forest area. The rest of our funding and support has come from site funds from the actual elementary school where we're starting this food forest. And the vast majority of that funding has gone toward irrigation supplies and labor. Next slide, please. So I'm sure, I've already seen some comments in the chat, but I'm sure many of you can think of several challenges to creating a new space. So this picture is what we had to work with, which was a just 1 acre decommissioned field on this 14-acre elementary school site. And that was all we had to work with. So the first step for us was not only creating a design, which Jorge got to work on right away. And honestly, we would highly recommend enlisting somebody who's very knowledgeable in permaculture or ecological design to help you get started. At the same time, we were educating our school district on what a food forest was, what was needed, what they were going to be doing and what we were going to be doing. We needed a lot of support from our school district with regards to fencing and also to water. So this area is extremely prone to vandalism, and our school district helped to planfully build fencing around this area so that it could be accessed by our garden educators and community members when the school site was closed, so that we can maintain the site throughout the summer and just when school's not in session. And we engaged the community members, literally knocking on doors, sending lots of information out to the community about what the food forest was and participating in the early stages of creating it. And the school district needed to give us our own water source so that the food forest could be irrigated differently than the rest of the field. So those components took over a year to get in place to make sure we had a secure site for planting, as well as irrigation, which really in our area, nothing can be done until the irrigation is in place. And the last year has been spent with putting in trenching pipes, putting in valves, and getting the drip irrigation started. So all of those things were challenges and preparation that had to happen prior to even being able to put a plant in the ground. So Jorge's going to speak a little bit to the design process next. Next slide.
Sweet, thanks, Lainey. Yeah, I want to share this resource with y'all here on the webinar. This book, Edible Forest Gardens. Can you see it? Oh no, it's being blurred. Okay, there it is. Written by Dave Jackie and Eric Tonesmeyer. This little design cycle, this design spiral, comes from Dave Jackie's work, and it's a very organic, very emergent design process. And what I love about it is that it puts a lot of these permaculture principles into, as an example, like the principle of obtaining a yield. It puts it into the context of a design process of, how do we define what it is that we want in community, in answering this question of, what do we want? What do we want to create? What do we want to see? What do we want to eat? these are things that I asked school like staff, I asked teachers. I was a garden educator at the school for a year, and so I was able to ask the students, to draw me the things that they want to eat, and I got to tally those and count out, 49 watermelons and I don't even remember how many apple trees and apples, um, and to really uh, engage people in this process of visioning and imaging what it is that we want to see there, and um, also, thinking about this like what is the potential here, and potential is one of those first principles articulated by Carol Sanford to define what regeneration means. And so a lot of those that are familiar with that word, there's these first principles of regeneration, and one of those is establishing a potential. And so this design process starts there and constantly keeps coming back there. Because there are things that even now, a couple of years into the project, that are emerging that are like, oh, this is a need that we hadn't identified. And this is a desire, of either the community at the school or even the neighbors. Just recently I met a neighbor who's been in the neighborhood for 70 years, almost 66 years. And I just met him. So I want to sit with him, and try to understand the next sort of the orange bubble is, well, what do we have, and that often in permaculture we use this tool of site analysis and assessment using a scale of permanence and identifying the categories of landscape features that are from the most permanent and least easily changeable to the ones that are most easy to exert change on or influence on. But yeah, what's this story of place? What is absolutely essential to this community, this landscape, this ecosystem? What makes it so unique? What is like what is its possibility, but also in regards to its history and in regards to the people that embody that history. And so you kind of keep bouncing between what do we have and what do we want, and from there clear next steps emerge. And designing on paper is part of that. Can I have the next slide? So you go from designing a concept to designing, a rough schematic to designing more detailed design. You can go to the next slide for a second. So this was an early schematic, just identifying from all of these things that the community was articulating that they wanted. We had all these outdoor classrooms. I think we're at like 6 or 7 outdoor classrooms for this entire space, because we wanted, outdoor learning, native habitat restoration. We wanted ecological food production, and we wanted community engagement. And those were the overarching goals, overarching patterns that kept on coming up over and over, that we could group all the things that people kept expressing that they desired under these different things. So the next slide has an evolving detailed design. We're still working on, exactly what the scale is going to be, what each of these plantings is going to be, because from the detailed design, which, this map gives us canopy sizes, and it's a 10-foot to an inch scale that we're using. And so we know what's going to go where pretty much to the foot by this stage of detailed design. But then there's patch design, what's going to be the understory plantings. This book, also Edible Forest Gardens, has a really lovely tool that I think is important to share here, is the Edible Forest Garden pattern language. So all of the things that we've been presenting on can be summed up as patterns. You can think of any element that goes into an outdoor classroom is a pattern. Any of those elements can be thought of as patterns that interconnect, and that can be expressing themselves differently in different schools or in different geographies. so one of those patterns is the 3-layer minimum, that, you know, once you have 3 layers, you don't have to have all 5 or 6 layers, you know, of a fully stratified food forest. But once you have 3 layers, like the Three Sisters Garden is a really good expression of this. Once you have 3 layers, that 3-layer minimum is kind of checked, then a lot of these optimized kind of relationships start to take hold, start to kind of take a life of their own, and express themselves as they might, in a much more symbiotic, synergistic way. So the next slide has, I think, a little rundown of those goals that I mentioned, but I've lost the slideshow. Is everybody?
Sorry, you want.
Oh, no worries, no worries. It's all good. You can take this opportunity to take another deep breath. It's really delightful to be here with y'all.
Sorry, I don't know what I.
Just keep breathing. Thanks. Yeah, no worries. And go to the following slide, I believe, is those overarching goals. And so this is something that we keep on going back to, you know, with every step in the design work, as we design, you know, on paper, from the very rough and schematic and conceptual to then going to more and more layers of detail, and then taking each patch individually and thinking about it as its own little ecosystem patch. Then we keep on revisiting these and thinking about them. And, you know, so what does it mean to do native habitat restoration, you know, in this context where we're respecting the history and the story of this place? You know, we've been reaching out to indigenous communities here in California. We have done work with ecosystem tending and learning traditional ecological knowledge from the Indian Canyon folks near the Bay Area. And we're also connecting to, you know, some of those important cultural foods like nopales, you know. And so those very drought tolerant species that Lainey mentioned were, you know, yuccas, which are basically cousins of the Joshua tree and have delicious edible flowers that I ate growing up in Honduras, and that a lot of my fellow Central Americans that are at this school have grown up eating and knowing, you know. And so nopales and yuccas were the first things we put in the ground before we even had any access to irrigation. Next slide. This is a little rundown of that a linear model of that succession story, you know, going from bare field to multi-stratified, what we might think of more as a food forest. But when we expand that definition to include the sense of time, then of course, you know, even the grassland between the oaks is the food forest. And so we have a farm clearing area, which is where we're designating, you know, a kind of mimic of syntropic agriculture is the model developed by Ernst Scotch in Brazil to plant all kinds of annual agriculture crops in between tree lines and in between trees that you are thinning, you know, to get more sunlight in, and mulching those branches and putting them back in the soil. Each increment of 1% of organic matter allows you, because of the amount of microbial life that you're sustaining in the soil, allows you to hold on to an extra 20,000 gallons, I think, of water per acre, or something amazing like that. And so, yeah, this model is really helpful in understanding that. And this slide is also from Edible Forest Gardens, but I also want to refer to, you know, in California, we're much more of an expression of that oak savanna kind of analog. And and so we've gotten a bunch of post live and blue oaks in the ground, and hopefully connecting to the ancestral foodways of, like the acorn, um, and everything that happens in between them. There's all these species. Mark Shepard, in his book Restoration Agriculture, describes that oak savanna mimic, and for each story, um, a lot of what we've modeled this food forest after has been from that ecosystem analog of the oak savanna. Next slide. Yeah, so this is our neighbor from across the way helping us install our pressure reducer on our main valve that was given to us as a separation from the water source for the school from the district. And just talking over the garden beds in the nursery garden, we got to talking with one of the dads of one of our kindergartners, well, first grader now, and he was so excited about the project. He's like, I have a bobcat that I can lend you, and so he brought over his bobcat, and we were able to trench 500 feet of piping, to put in our irrigation system to get water to all these different plantings over time. We're using drip irrigation. We're also heavily mulching. We're doing mini swales with the trencher, just perpendicular to slope, to the very, very gradual slope that we have, to get as much water harvested, with the little bit that it rains here, and to fireproof as much as we can. Yeah. Next slide. Yep, there he is. There's Juan Carlos and his kiddo on our community workday. We had a beautiful workday with over 70 volunteers, getting about 40 trees into the ground. And that's something that we've been, over the couple of years of the project, figuring out how to best design these moments for community to come together and have enough for everyone to do in a way that isn't chaotic. And of course it always kind of is, but it's also really beautiful to see people coming together. The neighbors walk by and they're like, whoa, there's trees in there now. And that's been a really delightful thing to experience. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, I mentioned, the previous slide speaks a little bit to those foodways, and this one too. Lee Klinger is a person I've been working with for a long time. He's an independent scientist who works with indigenous communities. There's a big issue in California, all over, but really a lot of the times that we have these huge catastrophic fires, yes, there's a level of greenhouse effect that's involved, and changing temperatures and climate volatility and all that, but there's also the gross mismanagement of our landscapes since colonization. So thanks, Tomas, for bringing in that a lot of times when we are seeking to implement these ways of growing food aren't new, they're ancient, and they are indigenous technologies that have actually been suppressed with the way that this continent has been settled. And so there's also the big opportunity for a more just way of being on the landscape and being in community, and giving sharing platform and sharing our educational places and systems with the communities that have carried this knowledge, of using fire in a healthy way. There's places where we are able to bring cultural burns back, when we participate in stewardship of landscapes being returned to indigenous folks. And there's, tools like Lee Klinger's fire mimicry, which is the management way that we use when fire can't quite yet come back to the landscape. But it also involves, nutrient treatments, using the oak tree as kind of like the keystone of an ecosystem, um, and managing their mineral access to minerals, calcium, and to other micronutrients, things that the fire would be doing, making those more available. Um, and yeah, we even go in and do tree surgeries and address, cankers of sudden oak death. And so this is some of the educational work and some of the cultural work that we want to do in the food forest as well. The previous slide, I think we kind of skipped right over. Can we see it for a second? Just before we wrap up the previous one. There we go. Yeah. We planted a mini Three Sisters garden. We installed a bunch of irrigation pots, and these are indigenous technologies. And it's really important to highlight that in our curriculum and to take the opportunity of bringing back this. I love the word that Eddie used. This immersive way of being in the ecosystem and being held and immersed in our food system. That also encompasses our educational system in these spaces, celebrating that cultural tradition, really trying to build and articulate and connect to that story of place. That phrase comes from the regenerative design work of Regenesis Group, Ben Haggard and Pamela Mang. Their book, Regenerative Development and Design, is also a really amazing resource in this work. And I think with that, I can bring it to a close, and I think we're going right into a question and answer sesh. Thank you all so much. This is really lovely.
Excellent. Thanks, panelists. So at this point, we just want to uplift some of the questions that have come through the Q&A function. I'll touch on some questions that are specific to the Education Fund in Florida, as well as the California-specific questions. But maybe to start with some general ones. There was a question. There's been a lot of discussion around food forests and just these applications being relevant to the ecoregions outside of California and Florida. But maybe for both of you all, can you maybe speak to just how these applications can lend themselves to different climate zones?
Yeah, sure. I can start off on that. So yeah, as far as applying it to different climate zones, it's basically the main thing is to know the plants. It's to do a lot of research on what grows well as a perennial in that particular zone. So that would be number one, is to just be, aware of what is traditionally grown in that zone. Like as I mentioned before, it's always easier to not go against the grain. So if there's something that takes very little maintenance and will grow for several years in an area, sometimes those are not the best commercial crops, and that's why we don't necessarily learn about them commercially. So it's important to just kind of do a deep dive into what do the native communities in that area, what have they been doing over the years? What were people doing for food before supermarkets in that area? And start to bring those plants back into our own ideas and communication and into our lives, our daily lives.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Next question. Maybe these are a set of questions more specific to just the relationship with students and the school cafeterias of your campuses. But the first one being, do you include children in the planning and building phase?
So for us, we only get a general idea of, what is mostly needed at the school. Um, it depends. People do design differently. For us, what we've come to see is that sometimes people don't know what they want, because they don't even know too much about food forests. So you kind of have to sell them some ideas also. But it is good to get, a general idea of the needs of the school.
To speak to that a tiny bit also, as a garden educator, I was always dancing with what the teachers expect. The kids love to get their hands dirty. They love to mulch, um, and and sometimes these things come up of like, well, are we engaging? Are we using children as free labor? And I think that's a very tough question to negotiate with, because and one of the answers that I give to that is, well, if the teachers, myself included, are able to work shoulder to shoulder with them and not stand above them as supervisors, then it feels like it's not extractive. And as long as we are able to connect to the educational pieces, what is the science behind what we're doing? What does mulch do for soil, like water retention and for microbial life? Then it's different. It's not just putting the kids to work, which was something that some of the teachers that were more reluctant to get on their hands and knees and weed and mulch with the kids were worried. And I would just encourage them to get shoulder to shoulder, get working with them, and make a game of it and play, and also learn while you're doing it. And so yeah, the education piece and the ability to work shoulder to shoulder with the kiddos, I think those are two ways in which I can speak to engaging the children in the work of building a food forest.
Yeah, and just to add to that students were an integral part of the design of our food forest, so they actively contributed both drawings and just input into the foods that they wanted to eat. So not only are they helping to plant, but they were really integral in the design process.
Great. Next question. Can you address the safety issues? Are kids allowed to enter during recess on their own? Concerns around nut allergies or just allergies in general? And then maybe just to follow that up, how are some of the foods that are produced within these sites incorporated and integrated into school cafeterias?
Yeah, so that was like 3 questions. Can you repeat that?
Sure. Yeah, just maybe touch on just general concerns around allergies and how kids are just able to, are kids permitted to freely forage the food on their own and harvest on their own? Um, and then how are these foods incorporated into the school cafeterias once produced?
Yeah, I can take so we really haven't had any allergy issues. I mean, they're not prepared foods. We do not grow any kind of peanuts or nut in our food forests, and we are very thoughtful in the plant selections that we put in. And we do a lot of work with the students while they're out there doing lessons. We do explain all of the plants to the kids, and generally taste and eat them. I mean, we just kind of encourage them to eat leaves as they walk in the food forest. So if they're hungry, they can just eat some leaves, and they know which ones they can eat, which ones are more herbs, and nobody wants to shout out the Cuban oregano.
A lot of that is up to the teachers. The teachers, if they want the students doing that, they know how to provide that type of structure for the classes. But it's important to see it as just like any other area of the school. Like students shouldn't be just randomly wandering in the art room and using the art supplies or the music supplies. It's the same thing. If they have a class that's scheduled for the food forest, that's when they're out there. So there's a lot of structure and scheduling that goes behind that to keep it organized.
And then as far as the cafeteria, we've worked really closely with our food and nutrition department here in Miami-Dade. The food and nutrition officer actually created procedures that are in the main procedure book for the cafeteria managers that outline very simple procedures, but outlines how to use what's being used in the food forest in the cafeterias. And we also went through the main recipe book and put optional garden to cafeteria items on every recipe that the cafeteria managers use. So we've tried to cut down as much red tape as possible. I mean, of course, we're constantly trying to train and encourage the cafeteria managers to go outside and be familiar, because, you know, every year there's a new people in the system. So we're always trying to encourage everybody, cafeteria managers as well, out into the food forest.
I can say a little bit also about, you know, our program, Growing Healthy Kids. Every class, all the kids do a tasting, and it's facilitated, and there's a process for it. And so one of those goals, you know, of how do we go, you know, grow all this ecological food is like, well, the yield that we need to obtain is actually like enough food for tastings year round. So it is definitely connected to how we're thinking of what we plant and the diversity of what we plant and the timing of it. And yeah, we haven't quite worked out how we're going to connect the school cafeteria, because they produce a lot of waste that we could compost, and we could certainly grow a lot of food that they could serve up to the kiddos. So that's definitely in the works for us too.
Excellent. Next question, who managed the food forest during the summer months? So when the kids are away, do you all have a system of just continuing the stewardship and the nurturing of the sites?
Yeah, I can speak to our food forests in that we have dedicated garden educators at our site. Jorge is really acting as a food forest steward right now in its implementation phase. But at all of our sites, we have a dedicated garden educator that's tasked with the summer garden maintenance. However, we spoke to the fact that we're drought prone and have very hot summers where we are. So there's been an extensive amount of work on the drip irrigation to make sure that it's as self-sustaining as possible without a lot of need for somebody to be coming in and watering or caring for it over the summer months.
And yeah, that's a great point, because for us, you know, I'm so glad we're doing this with two different areas. We have the exact opposite. You know, during the summer, that's our rainy season, so we get tons of rain in the summer. We don't have to do any irrigation at all, like everyday rain. So for us, it's really, you know, things start to grow, kind of overgrow. So we do have still, you know, a team of people going regularly. There are our food forest educators that work also with the students throughout the year, and they help to do some maintenance, you know, keeping things trimmed. And we do quarterly. We have a landscaper that, you know, he's certified to go into the schools to do cutting by machine, so he can handle some of the canopy maintenance and stuff like that. And then we just pray we don't get hurricanes.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for sharing all of your important work with this network. It's been just such a joy to hear about, you know, how you all are approaching this work and what you're hoping for the future. So on that note, I'm going to hand it back to Tristana to close us out.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to say a special thank you to our co-presenter, NFSN, National Farm to School Network, and Tomas. And thank you so much to our presenters, Eddie, Debbie, Lainey, and Jorge, for sharing your incredible knowledge. And just thank you for all the work that you do. It's truly inspiring. I think that the chat and the immense amount of questions is a huge testament to that, of how exciting and engaging this topic is, and how engaging you all have been in sharing the information. So thank you. I will say I would love all of your feedback, our attendees. Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your amazing resources in the chat. You shared so many resources that I'm actually going to update the resource handout with additional resources that you all shared. So thank you for modeling that. I should have said that at the beginning. I will be adding those to our resource handout, and we'll send it out to everyone who has registered for the webinar. So you'll get an updated resource handout with a compilation of as many as the resources that I can glean from our chat. So you'll get that. And then please share your feedback via our survey. We really appreciate, would love to know what other topics in relation to school gardens that you would like to learn for future webinars. We might just have to do School Food Forest Part 2 based on how much engagement and excitement there has been about this topic. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for being here. We'll go ahead and close out this webinar, and hope to see you in a future Zoom room. Have a good rest of your
Thank you,
day.
everyone.
See y'all in the food forest.
Thank you.
Bye.